My gosh, federalism assignment. Oh yeah, let's dive into this. Federalism is one of my favorite topics, and I think one of the reasons why I love federalism so much is like once you know about it and you realize that yeah, like everybody is impacted by the federal government, but it's something that like people from the state of Indiana have in common with California, like we all have you know, a president, we all have a senator, we all have a representative, but it's the weird, wonky state laws that I love. Um, and that's why, federalism is my favorite concept. So let's get right into it. How did the Constitution create a federal system of government? The Constitution organized government in a new way. It created a federal system of government. The Constitution gives certain powers only to the national government and certain powers to the state governments. There are also certain powers that they share. It's confusing. It's one of the reasons, again, why I love it. So you're going to be able to explain what a federal system is. I know that's the short answer question. You're also going to answer some questions about how the federal system differs from other forms of government, like a unitary government or a confederation. You're going to explain what powers the Constitution gives to the federal government and what powers it gives to the state governments. Let's go. So, how do some other nations organize their governments? Not all nations organize their government in the same way. Some nations have a unitary form of government. A unitary form of government is one in which a central government controls the state and local governments. The central government acts directly on the people. The power of state and local governments comes from the central government, and it can be taken away at any time. As a result, the central government is much stronger and more powerful than the state and local governments. The United Kingdom, France, and Sweden are examples of unitary government. Some nations have a form of government called a confederation. In a confederation, the states are independent and have control of anything that affects their citizens and territory. In a confederation, the central government only handles those things that are of common concern. The states can withdraw from the confederation at any time. The central government acts on the states, not directly on the people. The United States, under the Articles of Confederation, had a confederate form of government. Switzerland is a modern example of a confederation. Before the framers created the Constitution, most nations had either a unitary or confederate form of government. The kind of government that the framers created in our Constitution is a federal system of government. So, what is a federal system of government? According to natural rights philosophy, the people have a right to create a government. The people delegate to government the right or authority to govern them. In return, government is responsible for protecting the people's rights to life, liberty, and property. The Constitution begins with the words, "We, the people of the United States." The people have created a government and have given it the authority to govern them. Power flows upward from the people to their government. The people remain sovereign at all times. Sovereign means to have the highest rank of authority. The people have ultimate authority to control government. At the time the framers wrote the Constitution, the people in most other nations were not sovereign. Governments held authority over people. In some countries, the king was sovereign. In a federal system of government, the sovereign people decide how to delegate their authority. When creating the Constitution, the framers decided to delegate the power of the people to more than one government. They delegated some powers only to the national government. They delegated other power to the state government. Some powers, they decided, should be shared by the state and national governments. Finally, all other powers or rights are kept by the people. A federal system of government may also be described as a government that is based on the principle of federalism. federalism refers to the practice of dividing and sharing the powers of government between a central government and regional government, such as state governments. So what powers are delegated to the state and federal governments? As citizens of the United States, the people delegate certain powers to the federal or national government. These powers are in the Constitution. They include the power to create post offices, regulate interstate and foreign trade, declare and conduct war, and create a national currency. As citizens of the various states, the people delegate certain powers to their state governments. These powers are in each state's constitution. They include the power to regulate trade within the state, establish public schools, create traffic and motor vehicle laws, and regulate marriage and divorce practices. The state and federal governments share certain powers. These include the powers to make their own laws, tax the people, borrow money, create their own court systems, and provide for the health and welfare of the people. Finally, the people have kept certain rights or powers and have not delegated them to any government. These include the right to believe what we wish, form or join organizations, select our careers and live our lives as we choose our friends, travel where we wish to go, inside or outside the country, raising a family. So what powers does the Constitution deny to the federal and state government? A constitutional government means that the powers of government are limited. The U.S. Constitution limits the power of both the federal and state governments. Limits on the federal government. The federal government may not tax exports, spend money in a way that is not approved by law, enact laws that favor trade in one state over the others, exercise powers that belong to the states, or suspend the right to a writ of habeas corpus except in a national emergency. And the writ of habeas corpus just means to appear before a judge if you get accused of a crime. So here are the limits on state governments. They cannot coin or print money, enter into treaties with other nations, tax imports or exports, keep an army or navy in time of peace, or engage in war unless invaded or in immediate danger of being invaded. Limits on both the federal and state governments. So these are things that both governments can't do. They can't deny the right to trial by jury, enact ex post facto laws or bills of attainder, grant titles of nobility. The Bill of Rights places other limits on federal and state governments, and you will examine these in the next unit. Yes. So, federalism, baby. So far, this is something that I hope you're a little bit confused, because what I'd like for you to, be able to do with all of these powers and whatnot is actually, figure it out on your own. But we got to finish this. I just wanted a quick break, because once you learn about all of the things that the federal government can do and state governments can do and things that they cannot do, it's interesting. So here is why ultimately the federal government is always going to win out. So there's this thing called the Supremacy Clause. There were disagreements among the framers over what the powers the federal government should have. The framers did agree that the powers of the federal government were to be greater than the powers of the state governments. As you learned in Lesson 16, this is clearly stated in the Supremacy Clause of Article 6. The Supremacy Clause says, "The Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. The states cannot make laws that conflict with the Constitution or laws made by Congress. The Supremacy Clause gives the courts the power to decide disagreements between the states and the federal government. It does not change the fact, however, that the Constitution limits the power of both the federal and state governments." So the relationship between the federal and state governments has changed. The framers created a new and very complicated form of government. They should not predict exactly what powers the state and federal governments would eventually have. Early in our history, the state governments were very powerful. Today, the federal government has far more power over the state governments than most of the framers could have imagined. In thinking about the relationship between the federal and state governments, it's important to understand the following things. One, in spite of the increase in the power of the federal government, most of the laws that affect us directly are state or local laws. These laws include regarding education, most property, contracts, families, and criminal behavior. Congress makes most of the decisions about how much power is left to the states. Congress decides whether the federal or state government should carry out certain responsibilities. This complicated system is sometimes not as efficient as a unitary system of government, but the framers did not see this as a disadvantage. In fact, the framers thought that the separation of powers between the federal and state governments was one way to protect the rights of the people. Yes, indeed. And that'll pretty much do it. Remember, federalism is my favorite concept in government. Simply because, again, it makes you realize that, people in the state of Indiana who are dealing with snow and whatnot have something in common with people in Arizona or Florida where it's really warm right now. And that's the federal government. But the things that impact us the most, we don't care about who the president is. We don't care about who our senator is. We don't care about who our representative is on a day-to-day basis. But what we do care about are making sure that our roads are plowed from snow, our trash is picked up. You're getting an education right now from me, and that level of government is the state government. So, love you all. Hope you did well in the test. And yeah, good luck in the reading.